everybody. It is Tuesday, June 11th. You are listening to the Mo.news podcast, and I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
All right, Mosh, my daughter's homework for last night, for this morning, is to come in with a trivia question to stump the kids in her class. So I am going to give you a trivia question based on Roger Federer's commencement address to the graduating class at Dartmouth. Are you ready?
I'm ready, but this is not what your daughter's going to bring into her kindergarten class. This is a different fact. Okay, just making sure.
But I'll tell you that trivia too, and I'll see if you could guess it. Okay. We'll do that at the end.
Okay.
Roger Federer talked about points and winning and losing points and kind of how you have to just keep moving forward even if you lose a point. And he said he has won 80% of his matches. But what percentage of points do you think that he has won?
So I am no tennis expert, Jill, but I would imagine it would be close. If he won 80% of matches, he would need to win close to that, 65, 70% of points?
No, believe it or not, he said he has only won 54% of the points that he has played. And when you know tennis and how it's scored, that kind of makes sense a little bit. But pretty fascinating, because I think conventional wisdom would be that he's won about the same.
Right, because he's just been so dominant in the sport. But I guess what he's saying is it really comes down to, a point here, a point there. Life is a game of margins. I need to watch the commencement address, Jill, as this is commencement season. Yeah,
it's winning the points, I guess, that mattered, right? And yes, right up your alley in terms of commencement addresses.
Jill, incredibly, we've posted several clips over the course of the past 6 weeks or so as people have been graduating. And those clips that we've posted on Instagram have been some of the best performing videos. People really resonate, especially with certain messages from the various speakers out there. And again, it runs the gamut, right? From that Ohio State address where, the guy was talking about Bitcoin and doing a sing-along with people and positivity, to Jerry Seinfeld, to all the various folks we featured on the podcast over the last few weeks.
All right, we're going to get to some news, and make sure you stick around to the very end for the piece of trivia that Alex will be delivering to her class.
Let's not forget about that. I'll make a point at the end of On This Day in History.
All right, now to the news. Apple playing catch-up when it comes to AI, what the company rolled out in its big AI announcement Monday.
And on top of that, Jill, what Apple says AI stands for as far as they're concerned. They have a new take on what AI stands for.
Is it Apple Intelligence?
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh. All right, overseas, as we mentioned yesterday, the far right has surged in the European Parliament elections. The center still holds, but we're going to break down what exactly this means.
Yeah, a number of you had questions about this yesterday, so we're going to break it down further now that we know a little bit more about the results.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in the Middle East, pushing for the Gaza ceasefire deal, where things stand, and what we're learning about the hostage rescue. In health news, fewer than 1 in 5 eligible Americans are getting their recommended lung cancer screenings. Show me the money. More Americans are considered millionaires. We'll break down the numbers. The state of comedy, Jerry Seinfeld versus Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who played Elaine on the show. The debate over political correctness in comedy. And history at the Daytime Emmys with the oldest Daytime Emmys winner ever. We'll tell you who it is.
The clue is they are 98 years old. Who could it be?
Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, a big day for our founding fathers. We'll tell you about why John Adams says he assigned the Declaration of Independence to a young man from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson.
Okay, let's start with Apple's first big move in the artificial intelligence space and what it means for our iPhones and MacBooks. Apple unveiled its plans for AI technology on Monday, launching what it is calling its version of AI. As we mentioned, they are dubbing it, quote, Apple Intelligence. And this includes...
They have to go far for that one, Jill.
Moshe, it is very on brand. Let's just say that. So this includes a partnership with OpenAI to integrate ChatGPT into the tech company's products. It also includes some sorely needed updates to Siri technology that's been totally out of date with some of the recent innovations in AI in the last couple of years. The new Apple system will prioritize messages, emails, and notifications. and will offer writing tools that are capable of proofreading and suggesting what users have written in emails, notes, or texts. Essentially, you won't need to read a whole text or email. AI should tell you what matters in it. The new AI features could help calm concerns among investors that Apple had slipped behind its biggest rivals in the tech industry's embrace of artificial intelligence nearly 2 years after the rollout of ChatGPT. The company said the technology can answer questions, create images, and write software code, and can perform sensitive tasks. For example, it showed Monday how the system would be able to automatically determine if a rescheduled meeting time would complicate plans to attend a child's theater performance. The company is also integrating OpenAI's ChatGPT into Siri and other apps. ChatGPT integration will be coming to iOS 18, iPad OS 18, and Mac OS upgrades later this year. It will offer ChatGPT functions for free without the need to create an account. However, paid subscribers to ChatGPT will be able to access premium functions within the Apple products.
Jill, AI in the phone to reschedule a meeting time around your child's theater performance, that could come in really useful as we schedule our podcast tapings every day.
It's true, because if Apple Intelligence, as they're calling it, was reading the back and forth of our text messages and saw our calendar, they'd be like, how have you two even managed to put on this many podcasts? Like, how do you function?
It could definitely save us several minutes a day as to like, what are you doing at 4:45? Like, when are we going to end the podcast? Like, what time is Olivia's bedtime? What time is Alex's bedtime? Anyway, let's hope. I haven't said "Hey Siri" in years, so if this means that Siri becomes useful again to me as an iPhone user, I will be very happy about it. As you mentioned, Jill, Apple's push here into generative AI, a big response to Wall Street investors. They've seen in recent years the value of Microsoft, which is a huge player in AI, become a multi-trillion-dollar company. NVIDIA recently surpassed Apple. So Apple has felt lapped by these other companies as AI has made companies even more valuable. Apple's been trying to do its own thing. Clearly here, despite calling it Apple Intelligence, they're basically enlisting ChatGPT here. So it just shows how dominant ChatGPT is right now when it comes to all the players out there. Apple showcased a bunch of the improvements here. Jill, we put together a video clip over on the mo.news Instagram account, so go check it out over there on how it's going to improve your life as an iPhone user. This fall, messaging will add the ability to schedule messages, respond to messages by tapping back with just an emoji. Apple will also release a redesigned Photos app that'll make it easier to browse images. Say, Jill, I want to be able to say, hey, Siri, show me photos of Jill wearing blue in New York, because I remember that instance from 6 years ago. The photos will immediately pop up on my phone, Jill. And as somebody who posts news all day on Instagram, I have to tell you that the majority of my photos now are screenshots of news articles. So it's very hard to find pictures of my daughter and things that I actually care about amid headlines about Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump.
I totally get it. I don't think my phone is as bad as yours in terms of the news articles, but it can get that way. But then before bed, if I can't fall asleep, one of the things that helps is manually deleting all of those news articles. There's something like exhausting and just also cathartic about it. So I recommend.
Good for you, Jill. I stopped doing that years ago, and fortunately my cloud is very large. But it'll be very cool. You'll be like, show me a picture of my mom on her birthday 10 years ago. And it's like, boop, as opposed to having to scroll through your phone and looking through images, etc. So that will be helpful. Siri's been around, as we mentioned, for more than a decade, but they've effectively let it languish for a while. It's frustrated people, so they're hoping this really revives it in a way. They also say that because they now have used AI to train Siri, that Siri will mimic the way people talk, will become much more conversational. We've been talking about that whole controversy with OpenAI, their voice called Sky, that Scarlett Johansson said sounded like her. Anyway, apparently Siri will sound much more real and much more conversational. It'll also be able to hold a conversation where if you ask something about like, hey Siri, send me some hotel availabilities in New York City for the month of July, and then you follow up with a question with like, what's the weather going to be? Siri should then remember that you were talking about New York in July and be able to give you a forecast for that date. So they're hoping to make it much smarter for you. One other feature, Jill, that is old news to Android users, but But new to those of us who use iPhones, they introduced yesterday an editing tool called Cleanup, which uses AI, Apple intelligence, of course, as they're calling it. They can erase unwanted features from a photograph. So if you thought you took the perfect photo, but there's somebody behind you, or you got like a random or if you got like a fire alarm or a stop sign behind you and you just want to clean up the image, you can use the AI to cut out images you don't like. You can just say, Siri, cut out, noise in the background. Siri, make it pop. And apparently it'll then adjust the hues, the brightness, the contrast, and make you a better photographer than you already are.
Moshe, I'm starting to almost feel bad for photographers because I know it is such a skill and it really is an art form. And I've had professional photos taken and they're so special. But I feel like you can do so much just with your iPhone and some of this new technology. I don't know.
Yeah, no, we were actually, what's interesting, Jill, is to see professional photographers embrace this. I was talking to one recently who was telling me that she loves being able to use AI with Photoshop. And she says, hey, AI, make this person's arms 10% skinnier. Hey, AI, clean up the shine on their forehead immediately. And so you do see, while you could do that manually, you do see AI helping professional photographers. But I totally, see your point. And, especially with smartphones and how great the cameras have become, that's made the business much more difficult for professional photographers. There still is a role for them, but certainly not what it once was. Jill, one more thing before we move on to the next story here. With this new iOS, they say finally that if you have someone in your life who's an Android user and you're an iPhone user, you're going to be able to send high-resolution images between the phones. Now, they'll still be green. The text will still be green. But iPhone has always prioritized this to the point of lawsuits. Hey, if you want good photos, you make your friend get an iPhone. Now it appears you will be able to send high-grade images between iPhones and Android devices here in the U.S. sometime this year.
The green text is so easy to fix, you'd have to think, that it is such a deliberate attempt by
totally.
Apple.
That's what they call, Jill, Apple
blatant.
intelligence. Apple intelligence when it comes to marketing.
The real Apple intelligence. All right, switching gears, we just wanted to do a follow-up on those European elections that we told you about yesterday as we get some more information. So far-right parties across the continent did have very strong showings, but their momentum didn't cause the center ground of European politics to cave in. On the other hand, it was the leftist parties like the Liberal and Green groups who lost the most seats and relevance in the European Parliament. The center-right European People's Party, the EPP, held on to the majority for the next 5-year term of the European Parliament. Notably, the way European politics currently works, they will not be working with the far right, which they deem to be xenophobic and not solutions-focused. Instead, they'll be reaching out to the progressives, centrist, and liberal parties to form what they call, quote, broad majority for a strong Europe. However, the surge in nationalist right-wing parties will make it slightly harder for European leadership to pursue goals related to climate change, agricultural policy, and migration over the next 5 years. Those parties appear to have gained the most seats in France, Germany, and Italy, set to win around 150 of the 720 seats. The parties have some with nationalist and anti-immigrant policy agendas, less about working together with all 27 countries and more about caring for the needs of their own countries. Since the last elections in 2019, once fringe far-right parties have entered the mainstream. Over the last 5 years, the EU has dealt with the pandemic, a surge in migrants from Africa and the Middle East, an economic slump, and an energy crisis fueled by Russia's war in Ukraine. Roughly 260 million eligible voters chose 720 parliamentary members from 27 EU member states. It is the single largest democratic election outside of India. And it does give us a sense about how people are generally feeling across a wide swath of Europe.
Yeah, we wanted to follow up today because we just had those initial results in yesterday's pod. We got a lot of questions about this. So we wanted to give you a deeper sense as more of the results came in on Monday. And what it really shows here is you do see more and more Europeans who are concerned about the surge in migrants in a number of their countries and the impact of climate legislation on their countries' economies. In France, the anti-immigrant National Rally Party, that's led by Marine Le Pen. You might have heard of the Le Pens. Her father ran it for a long time. She's been seen as very close to Vladimir Putin, fascist friendly, but significantly in France, resonating right now is the surge of migrants they've seen. And so her party, they've tried to moderate, at least rhetorically speaking, and when it comes to some of her policies in recent years, won a third of the votes in the European Parliament. They doubled up on Emmanuel Macron's party, which led to him calling elections. I'll get to that in a second. So in France, you saw the far right do very well. In Italy, you saw them do well as well. That's where the Italian premier, Giorgia Meloni, her party doubled her seats in the European Assembly. She's seen on the far right as well. And then in Germany, the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party, the AfD party, had significant gains. They're now the second largest German party in the legislature. Their party formed about 10 years ago. They've been trying to peel off their neo-Nazi label that many critics deem them, though they are very critical of migrants. They talk about German greatness, putting Germany first. And of course, that has different feel when you talk about it in Germany versus the US, make America great again. In Germany, talking about German greatness, German first, evokes memories of the Nazi rhetoric of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. That said, that German party isn't even accepted in the rest of the far right of Europe. That's because their main European candidate said, as he was talking about history, that he doesn't think all members of the SS, members of the Nazis, were actually criminals. So even for the far right in France and et cetera, they said, whoa, we can't be associated with you. So they're sort of on an island unto themselves. And that's one of the issues here you see with these far right parties. While they're gaining a number of countries, they haven't quite figured out how to work together here. That said, it appears the center right and the left will hold the main coalition there in the European Parliament as they make sort of larger decisions about all those countries. But a lot is still left to the countries themselves. And that brings us back to France, which I mentioned earlier. Emmanuel Macron, the president, dissolving his parliament, calling for snap elections at the end of the month. That's something you can do in a parliamentary system. It would be the equivalent if we had the systems here for the president to say, hey, we need to have congressional elections this month. Let's do a reset. Of course, that's not how our system here works in the U.S., but that's how many parliamentary systems work. And so Macron made the call. He was under no obligation to do that, but he did because he's rolling the dice here to say, hey, France, do you see what's happening with this election? Let's have our own elections right now. Those of you who sort of sat it out or thought that this was a good idea, do you want to double down on the far-right parties, on the nationalist parties, on what he sees as very xenophobic parties that are anti-democracy, or not? So this could end one of two ways for Emmanuel Macron. In a month, we could be doing the show, Jill, and saying that in France, the far right has just had the biggest election of all time, which means Macron as president will have to deal with them as a majority in the legislature. His goal with that, show they can't rule, show they are bad. So when they elect a president, presidential elections are separate in France, in a couple of years, he'll be able to deem them irrelevant and say, look, you gave them a shot, stick with my party. So that's one bet. The other bet is that, he believes that he'll be able to make a case in the next month ahead of these elections that, hey, you should be scared of these people, and they're rising way too quickly, hoping that that will then reinforce bringing people back to his side. So that's the bet Macron is making here.
It is a big risk on Macron's part. Moshe, how did I do on the pronunciation after I've been taking a couple of Babel lessons?
We're going to keep working on it.
I've heard a few people compare it to British Prime Minister David Cameron when he decided to just put out a referendum on Brexit, thinking it would never pass.
Years ago, that Brexit, yes.
Yes, and it wound up passing, and they've left the European Union. And so sometimes these elections don't always work out how you think that they are.
When you gamble, you got to know that sometimes it'll roll your way and sometimes it won't. And certainly Macron is making a bet here. It's an election we will closely watch, given the impact, the significance that France has in the European Union. As a member of the G7, as a member of NATO, you saw over the weekend all the meetings between Biden and Macron, et cetera. And the two of them both staring down threats from the right? Biden in terms of Donald Trump, Macron in terms of the Le Pen and the far right party there. Obviously, a lot of nuances, a lot of differences between them, but still they sort of see eye to eye on that. Jill, it all speaks to the larger issue. Again, one of the top issues when you ask Europeans, their biggest issue beyond the economy is immigration.
Right. Immigration, whether by people fleeing persecution or seeking work, has long become a contentious issue in Europe, pitting main countries of entry against others that become destinations. More than 2.3 million people claimed asylum in the EU in just the 2-year period between 2015 and 2016, many of them fleeing from Syria's civil war. There were nearly 900,000 asylum applications in the EU in 2022, about the same in 2023, and that is on top of 4.2 million Ukrainians awarded temporary protection since Russia's full-scale invasion in February of 2022.
Yeah, so we're really talking about more than a decade now when it comes to 1 million or 2 million a year coming from the Middle East, coming from Africa. You mentioned the 4.2 million Ukrainians who came in out of that war. And so you're seeing increasing concern across Europe saying, whoa, this has been too much too quickly. You saw it in particular in Germany. That's where Angela Merkel, the chancellor, infuriated some folks by saying, we're going to welcome all the Syrian refugees and anyone coming from the Middle East that needs a home. Some Germans saying, whoa, we should be doing this. We should be doing this at scale. You do see reception centers across Europe reaching capacity. There were the Syrian refugees. There were other refugees, asylum seekers from across the region, and of course the Ukrainian issue. And so that is led here. That is really inspired in some cases some of these farther right anti-immigrant parties who are just saying, hey, we're just here to represent the people and ensure that our sovereignty and that our identities aren't shifting here. Jill, if you look at polling across Europe, between 60 to 90% of voters, depending on the country you're talking about, see immigration, see migrants more as a threat than a plus. Again, between 60%, 2/3, up to 90% in some of those countries, talking about migrants from other countries. And so we've been talking about the immigration, the migration, the asylum issue here in the US, but keep in mind that Europe and the US are different in this way. Here in America, we very much, most of us believe in hyphenates, right? You come here, you become a Greek American, a Korean American, a Chinese American, etc. You immediately are adapted into the system. Assimilation happens pretty consistently across the board in terms of working in the system, etc. Europe is very different. If you're French, if you're English, if you're German, you can talk to immigrants who are even second, third, fourth generation. I remember being in Berlin a few years ago with a cab driver who was like, my grandfather came here from Turkey 40 years ago, and they won't consider me here in Germany a German. They still call me Turkish, even though we're several generations in. So identity and the culture issue, significant there. Then on top of that, in Europe, you have these extensive welfare programs. So keep in mind here, we don't have much of a backstop, right? You come here to America, you got to figure it out on your own. You might get a little assistance from the government, but nothing like Europe. In Europe, they're very resentful of the fact that they have these huge social safety nets, and they see these migrants living off the system and never really contributing to the economy. So you have the assimilation issue, you have the identity issue, you have the social safety net issue, and then there's the nature of the migrants who are coming. Here in the US, you're mainly talking about people from Central and South America, Latinos. They integrate into jobs. Faith-wise, most of them are Christians. In Europe, you're seeing a huge number of Muslims come in. You're seeing, again, they're having difficulty integrating. In some cases, they might be multiple generations in, not learning the language, living under their own faith laws. And you see this in certain parts of France, not very patriotic towards the country. And so it's reinforcing these perceptions. Again, this is the perception among some Europeans of the migrants who are coming in, and it is leading to this backlash that you're now seeing play out in the polls.
Time now for the speed read from the Associated Press. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday began his latest trip to the Middle East. This one focuses mainly on urging Arab leaders to pressure Hamas to accept a ceasefire proposal outlined 10 days ago by President Biden. Blinken is on his 8th visit to the region this week since October 7th. The trip comes as Washington seeks to increase pressure on Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal with Israel and ensure that this war does not expand into Lebanon. Hamas has yet to provide a formal response to the proposal, which includes a 6-week ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from heavily populated areas of Gaza, the freeing of all women, elderly people, and children held hostage, and a surge in humanitarian aid. Blinken said Hamas was the only outlier in not accepting the proposal for this 3-phase deal involving the release of hostages and talks toward an end to fighting, to which he said Israel has agreed. A senior Hamas official told Reuters that Blinken's Gaza ceasefire comments were, quote, biased to Israel. Blinken's efforts are complicated by Israel's rescue operation Saturday that freed 4 hostages but killed more than 100 Palestinians, drawing an angry response from Hamas. In a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu later yesterday, Blinken reinforced the deal's benefits, including that it could lead to de-escalation in Israel's tit-for-tat violence with Hezbollah and ease tensions with other Arab neighbors.
Yeah, so Blinken continuing his what they call shuttle diplomacy across the region. He's also going to Qatar. He's also going to Jordan, along with his visits to Egypt and Israel, where he's trying to make the case, guys, let's close the deal here. It came as a UN Security Council resolution passed yesterday saying, hey, let's end this. The ceasefire deal is pretty good. Now, Hamas, as you mentioned, still hasn't given a formal response to all of this. Then you have the Israeli side. We told you yesterday about the fact that one of the centrist ministers, Benny Gantz, is leaving. That then leaves potentially more influence here for some of the more far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition government who oppose a ceasefire deal. Now, while Israel is officially accepted, as far as the government's concerned, some of those far-right members not so happy about it. The sticking point, as we've told you, Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire. Hamas wants to stay in charge. Israel wants total military victory. And the U.S. says that's not possible. And also Hamas, you're no longer running this place. Let's follow this in order. A 6-week temporary ceasefire followed by talks about a permanent ceasefire. And Hamas wants a different order of events here. This all comes, Jill, as the U.S. is hedging its bets, it appears. NBC reports as of yesterday that they are discussing potentially a direct deal with Hamas. The U.S. having a direct deal with Hamas. Why? We still have 5 Americans believed to be alive who've been held hostage now, more than 240 days there. And if this current ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas doesn't work out, the U.S. apparently is looking at a specific deal with Hamas. Now, not negotiating with Hamas, negotiating with Qatar, since we don't talk to terrorists, but we talk to countries who do talk to terrorists. And so that's what we would be doing here. Unclear what the U.S. would put on the table in exchange for the release of the 5 Americans, but still a very interesting development there. Jill, Hamas still super peeved about that rescue operation over the weekend, so it doesn't look like any sort of deal here is imminent.
No, and a couple of points. One thing that we talked about in terms of the Americans, you've got to wonder why they didn't think of doing this 8 months ago.
I think that they definitely wanted to defer to the Israelis and have the Israelis make the deal here, but it has been noted to us on the Instagram account by people being like, whoa, I forgot that there's still Americans being held in Gaza. Why is there not more urgency around getting them out? And so clearly here, that's an interesting play, though, Jill, because that effectively puts pressure on the Israelis to make a deal with Hamas. If America's like, we're going to make our own deal here and cut you out, and that would then make Hamas super happy because that shows a divide between the U.S. and Israel. Jill, there's a lot of 3D chess happening here in terms of what's being leaked, what's being put out there, who's putting pressure on whom. And so there's a lot there just in terms of putting that headline out, even if the U.S. isn't really serious about it.
And back to the rescue operation, one point that I just wanted to make as we talk about the casualty count amongst Palestinians, which I do not want to diminish in any way, but I do try to listen to and watch all kinds of news coverage and analysis. I'm not sure if you saw on Instagram, because I think everyone is kind of in their own echo chamber. I tried to show how both sides were portraying the rescue of the hostages completely differently. I was listening, though, today to Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back, and he was talking to an Israeli journalist, Nadav Eyal, who monitors the Hamas Telegram accounts and channels. And he made this point So he said, first, Hamas said that only a few dozen or so Palestinians were killed. It started with about 30, and now it's over 200.
Sorry. So this was in the Telegram thread of Hamas as Hamas was reporting out the details of the rescue operation.
Correct. They also said that the operation was actually conducted by the U.S. Navy SEALs and not the IDF, which is something that has happened before, and it's a way kind of not to give Israel a win, like it was the Americans who did it, not the Israelis. And they also said that 18 Israeli soldiers had been killed in the operation. And we know from Israel that one Israeli rescuer lost his life. But Ayal's question was, why is the international press taking this number from the Hamas health ministry of 200? Even international aid organizations have not confirmed it. And if you want to say that those numbers are reliable, that 200 civilians were killed, then why isn't the international media reporting that the U.S. Navy SEALs did the operation and that 18 IDF soldiers were killed? So his question was, why is the international media picking and choosing what part of Hamas's information they're choosing to report?
Right. Basically, consider the source. If the source is telling you 4 different things and 3 of them we know verifiably aren't true, why are you believing one of the things they tell you, given that the other things are pretty quickly you're able to confirm they're not true? Jill, it comes as we've talked about over on the Instagram feed on Friday. The AP, the Associated Press, did an analysis of some of the casualty count, and while we've seen horrifically the number of civilians die in Gaza in the thousands, there are when it comes to the specific numbers, etc., they did an analysis saying, again, we don't see the numbers that Hamas is seeing. We've done an analysis of their numbers, and there's no third party here to verify things. So I think the larger point is in this war, and this speaks to something Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor for the U.S., said on CNN over the weekend. We're never going to quite know the truth here. When it comes to a number of things, sadly, during this war that maybe after the fact we'll be able to come to some general terms. But ultimately here, things are murky. There's no third-party verifiable way. We do know that this war is horrific. We do know innocent people are dying. But then getting to how they died, who they were involved with, were they combatants, were they civilians, what's the gender breakdown, that all gets pretty murky. And of course, that's significant when allegations about genocide and purposeful killing of civilians are being thrown around. That's why these things matter. Even as we say, even as we know innocent people are dying, the proportionality is significant, especially when it comes to these court cases and some of the allegations being thrown around.
From the Washington Post, jurors in the Hunter Biden gun trial in Delaware are due back in court this morning to resume trying to reach a verdict. A little background on this case. Hunter Biden is accused of making 2 false statements and filling out the paperwork to purchase a gun back in 2018. First, he claimed not to be addicted to or using illegal drugs, and then he claimed that the statement was true. He also is accused of unlawfully possessing the weapon for 11 days. First Lady Jill Biden's been in court almost every day, as has a big part of the Biden family, minus the president himself. President Biden has said that he would not pardon Hunter if he is found guilty.
Yeah, very firm no when he was asked by ABC's David Muir over the weekend, in Normandy, are you going to pardon your son? No. And then there was a follow-up. Again, one-word answer there, trying to affirm that there's going to be independence here, despite the fact that he's president and this is a federal crime here. So the jury here has begun deliberations. They're going to see if they believe Biden's case, that he wasn't actually addicted to drugs at this time, despite statements to the contrary, including statements he made in his own autobiography. The defense attorney for Biden, Abby Lowell, saying the U.S. legal system affords everyone the right to due process and protection against bogus charges. It means that Hunter deserves those legal rights as much as anyone. He's arguing that prosecutors here relied on suspicion, conjecture, and failed to remove reasonable doubt beyond a reasonable doubt that he was actually on drugs when he purchased this gun. The prosecution, on the other hand, presented evidence that Biden's crack cocaine addiction in the years leading up to and around the time he purchased the gun in October 2018 was beyond a reasonable doubt. Biden's lawyers say specifically, you don't have evidence that he was taking drugs those 11 days or drugs when he purchased the guns. You're just relying on overall evidence around that time period. So the jury is going to have to deliberate here on that reasonable doubt idea, Jill. This is a pretty rare case. One of the reasons this is being heard as far as the Bidens are concerned is because his name is Biden. For the most part, there's hardly any cases related to lying on a gun application heard unless you commit a crime with that gun. Remember, he owned the gun for 11 days, no crime committed. When his then girlfriend found the gun, she threw it away, and they thought that was that. But here you are, and he's facing here potentially 25 years in prison, which he totally won't get because he'd be a first-time offender, but a serious potential gun charge here should he be found guilty.
By the way, even if he is exonerated here, Hunter Biden still faces another trial over not paying taxes. That one will be closer to the presidential election, so definitely something to watch.
Yeah, and something the Trump people and Republicans will be sure to bring up Biden in a courtroom.
From Yahoo Science, lung cancer is the deadliest form of cancer in the United States, but new research shows that fewer than 1 in 5 people who are eligible to get screened for the disease actually do so. And while studies show people were more likely to be up to date with lung cancer screenings as they got older, only 1 in 20 Americans without insurance reported having screenings. The study was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. It analyzed data from a nationwide survey. Among the nearly 26,000 people who were eligible for lung cancer screening, about 6 in 10 said they currently smoked. Only 18% of them said that they were up to date with lung cancer screening, although the levels varied by state, with fewer people in southern states saying that they were up to date. The study didn't specifically look at why more people aren't getting screened, but there are some theories.
Yeah, we'll discuss them here. But first, a reminder, the American Cancer Society recommends yearly screening for lung cancer for anyone from ages 50 to 80 who currently smoke or used to smoke a pack a day. And they say if you smoked a pack a day for 20 years, you need to be getting screened every year, especially if you smoke 2 packs a day for 10 years, same idea. So the big threat continues to be if you were a smoker, if you were a heavy smoker, you got to be screened here. One of the concerns here they're having is healthcare access. You mentioned, Jill, people who are uninsured, feeling that they don't want to pay for screenings. That contributes to a lot of medical issues here. One of the other issues here is that healthcare providers may not be requesting that their patients get screened. The idea of lung cancer screening, still relatively new, still about a decade old here. And so in some cases, the doctors might not be recommended. In some cases, the patients might not be going. A reminder, lung cancer screening takes about 3 minutes. It's a CT scan. You don't have to undress, no preparation, no contrast, no IVs. The scan is performed with a single breath hold. So pretty straightforward here. And so they're putting a call out here. We thought it was important to note, if you know someone who is once a smoker who meets those requirements, make sure they're getting scanned. Though we should also note, Jill, lung cancer, while traditionally associated with cigarettes, as many as 20%, 1 in 5 lung cancer cases happen to never smokers every year. While annual screenings are not recommended for them, if you're concerned about lung cancer, have a family history, etc., definitely something to talk about with your doctor.
From The Hill, the number of millionaires in the U.S. grew by about 500,000 last year, outpacing other countries, according to a new study. The U.S. population of high net worth individuals grew by just over 7% and now sits with over 7.4 million millionaires, according to a recent report from Capgemini. In 2022, there were 6.9 million. The company defines a millionaire as someone with $1 million of investable assets, excluding their primary residence, collectibles, consumables, and consumer durables. The 2023 numbers bounced back a bit for the wealthy compared to 2022, during which their net worth dropped.
Jill, I looked up the numbers here. If you took all of America's millionaires and put them in a state, they'd be the 14th most populous state in America. Arizona is about 7.4 million people. So think about that. So that's a way to put it in perspective for everybody. Obviously, among the things that have helped here is the stock market recovery. Many high net worth individuals have been investing and taking riskier bets as the market has just had, besides the 2020 collapse, just an incredible run here over the course of more than a decade here. Jill, of the millionaires, they have a group called the ultra high net worth individuals. Those are people who have assets of $30 million or more. They hold about a third of the wealth in the country. And then they looked at this globally. The number of millionaires increased across the globe by about 5%. So there's about 23 million millionaires in the world, about a third of them here in the US. North America, North America with the most amount of millionaires, followed by the Asia Pacific region, about 5%. Europe has about 4% of the millionaires. Latin America, about 3% of millionaires. The Middle East, about 2%. Africa, 0.1% of millionaires.
From NBC News, a debate over the state of comedy between Jerry and Elaine. 25 years after Seinfeld went off the air, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is countering Jerry Seinfeld's recent comments, blaming political correctness for killing comedy, saying having an antenna about sensitivities is a good thing and that such PC bashing is a red flag. Seinfeld made headlines for his April interview with The New Yorker, where he said funny stuff on TV like the golden era sitcoms Cheers and The Mary Tyler Moore Show just doesn't exist anymore. He said that, quote, this is the result of the extreme left and PC crap and people worrying so much about offending other people.
So Jerry had his say. Julia is pushing back in an interview in the New York Times that was published over the weekend that got some attention. She was asked about it. And she said, quote, when I hear people start to complain about political correctness, and I understand why people might push back on it, but to me, that's a red flag because it sometimes means something else. I believe being aware of certain sensitivities is not a bad thing. She noted that looking back on comedy and drama 30 years ago, which would include their show Seinfeld, through today's lens, you sometimes find bits and pieces that do not age well. I think to have an antenna about sensitivities is actually not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that all comedy goes out the window. Jill, where do you stand on the debate here between Jerry and Julia?
This isn't a cop-out, but I actually am somewhere in the middle. I think that comedians do police themselves too much. I do think that there's a lot of comedy that I still find funny, even if a bit offensive, that absolutely could not get made today. At the same time, I do think that times change and culture changes, and we should be aware of how certain things may offend a certain group here or there. So I think, like I said, somewhere in the middle. And something that's definitely aged well here from Variety, legendary actor and comedian Dick Van Dyke has made history winning the 2024 Daytime Emmy Award for Guest Performer in a Daytime Drama Series via his spot on Peacock's Days of Our Lives. At 98, that makes Van Dyke the oldest actor to receive a Daytime Emmy win. Van Dyke came into Friday's 51st Daytime Emmy Awards already making a mark as the oldest Daytime Emmys nominee ever. So even if he didn't win, he was still making history.
Just an honor to be nominated. Oldest nominee ever, oldest winner ever. He said, I can't believe it. I was playing old men all my life. If I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. He says he's had a wonderful time acting. Jill, fun fact about Dick Van Dyke. Back about 50 years ago, CBS was trying out different morning show combinations. And they had a combination for a short while with a host named Dick Van Dyke and a news reader named Walter Cronkite. The two of them were the CBS morning show team for a bit there.
So you're saying if you can't do news, act?
Yes. Well, for Dick, that worked out. Walter stayed with news. So the team each found their strengths.
Usually it's the other way around. You find these like wannabe actors that are like, you know what, it didn't work out for me. I'm going to just become a journalist.
Well, for example, Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace became a journalist in his 40s after being a commercial reader, etc. He joins a show called 60 Minutes and takes on a new life.
I think Brian Williams, too, wanted to be a comedian.
Yes, fun fact about Brian Williams. He was considered a finalist for the Late Show slot that when David Letterman leaves the Late Show on NBC to take on Leno. So Letterman goes to CBS. That slot is open. The final round as they were deciding who could be the new host, they would give it to Conan O'Brien, but the runner-up there, Brian Williams. Let's go to more. Let's go real briefly to On This Day in History. We begin in 1776. The Continental Congress on this day created a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. It would take them just a couple weeks to put it together. On the committee, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, among them. Jefferson was assigned to write it. John Adams would write later that he was the one who decided to give it to a young 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson for a few reasons. One, Jefferson was from the South, so he could get the southern states aboard. Also, that he was a better writer. Adams admitted that. And then Adams also in a letter admits that he was so obnoxious that if he wrote the Declaration of Independence, people probably would give him a hard time over it. It'd be much more questions. So they gave it to Jefferson. Funny enough, when Jefferson found out that that was Adams' memory of it, he's like, Adams is misremembering. It was just a committee. We decided I would write it. I don't remember all this other stuff. On this day in movie history, 2 major Spielberg classics came out. On this day in 1982, E.T. was released. And on this day, 11 years later, in 1993, Jurassic Park opened in theaters. Sticking with TV and movie history here, on this day 20 years ago, Napoleon Dynamite premiered in theaters. Jill, I appreciate you still liking me as a co-host, despite the fact that I don't have nunchuck skills. Do you remember any quotes from that movie? Or is it a dude thing?
I appreciate you still liking me as a co-host, not even remotely understanding what that meant.
I don't got nunchuck skills.
I've never seen the movie.
Oh my God, Jill. That was a college movie I watched on DVD like 100 times. And on this day, 2002, American Idol debuted. That was a big show for a while. I voted a couple years on my flip phone, back when I had a flip phone.
I did too. And I have never participated in anything like that where you vote for a national show, and except for American Idol.
The early years, we were all on board.
All right, Moshe, before we go, the trivia that my daughter is going to unleash on her classroom today. Are you ready?
Go ahead.
Why is the front of a giraffe's tongue darker, usually a dark black, blue, or purple?
Is it what they eat?
Although not scientifically proven yet, many experts think that this darker pigment is nature's way of protecting giraffes' tongues against ultraviolet rays. So it has higher concentrations of melanin, which acts like a natural sunscreen.
Wow, young Alex really bringing the facts to her kindergarten class tomorrow.
Is that too advanced? I'm thinking maybe I need to give her something easier that she's going to remember.
She's explaining melanin. Good for her.
I'm not going to...
UV rays?
I just told her the sunscreen part.
Okay.
That it acts like sunscreen because they live in the desert.
Yeah. Let's bring it down. Sometimes we're not going to be bringing things on this podcast down to a 5th grade level. Let's bring it down to a 5-year-old level. Explain it to me like I'm 5, Jill.
Well, that's the reason. It basically acts like a sunscreen.
There you go.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. Share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys.